day, sneaky Stompas. There's only one thing worse than a stompy one what's trying to kill ya, and that's a stompy one what's making you wait for it. Bad Moon Wisdom. Part 1. Da Eden Geets. The Manufactorum district on the edge of Hive Vulcanus had been built by Humies who believed in straight lines, tall chimneys, and walls thick enough to stop anything short of the end of the world. The end of the world had now arrived, parked its wagons in the slag fields, and was getting bored. Zogdreg Clawfist stood on the shoulder of his Gorkanaut and glared at the hive through a pair of magno goggles he'd taken off a smaller mech who hadn't been using them properly, on account of being unconscious at the time. The goggles showed him chimneys, walls, ash drifting past broken windows. What the goggles did not show him, what they had refused to show him all morning, was the enemy. "Dare in there," he growled. "I can smell the promethium." The enemy was Stompy Ones. Everyone knew it. The War Truck boys had seen them 2 days back, striding along the liberation line with banners streaming off their backs like they owned the ash. 5 of them, proper big ones. The kind of enemy an orc tells his grand spores about. The whole camp had cheered. Then the Stompy Ones had walked into the Manufactorum district, tucked themselves behind the buildings, and stopped. And that, as far as the assembled Big Meks of the cruiser Gutripa were concerned, was where the situation had gone from brilliant to insulting. "Eden," said Grabnut Skyfisher, for the 9th time that hour. He said it the way a pain boy says infected. His 3 tractor cannons sat behind him in a neat row, barrels elevated hopefully at a sky that contained, as it had all week, absolutely nothing. Not a flyer, not a deaf copter, not so much as an ambitious pigeon. Big Stompy Ones, Iden bein' buildings. What's the galaxy comin' to? Ever seen a squiggoth try to sneak? It's like dat, only sadder, 'cause the squiggoth don't know better and dese gits do. "It's cunnin', is what it is," said Fizzbang Tank Papa, who was crouched over his slate, drawing. "They waits till we walks past, den, bam, out they comes, crump, stomp, back beyond da wall, ambush finkin'." "That's blood axe finkin'," said Grabnuts darkly. "That's why it's gonna work on you lot," said Fizzbang, "and not on me, 'cause I done a plan." He held up the slate. The plan appeared to be a drawing of a building, with an arrow going into it, and a great many explosions coming out. Urgluk Ironclad said nothing, because Urgluk rarely said anything before it was worth saying, and when he did say it, it came out of his mega armor's vox grill, sounding like a landslide in a drainpipe. He stood at the edge of the gathering, huge and still, his 5 mega knobs behind him, in a wall of yellow-painted plate, killsaws idling with a sound like patient bees. Occasionally his custom force field gave a little test flicker, and the air smelled of lightning. The 5th mech arrived the way he arrived everywhere these days, announced by himself. "And then," boomed a voice from up the slag road, "when all other mechs had given up and was sittin' round scratchin' their squig brains, then came WAAAGH the rig in his newest and most brilliantest masterwork, and the boys did gasp in wonderment. The boys did, in fairness, gasp. Some of them also placed bets on whether it would fall over. The new dakka came striding out of the dust on 2 enormous piston legs, which was one more leg-related idea than anyone had asked for, and exactly one fewer than the old rig had possessed wheels. It was gold. It was gold the way the old one had been gold, and then gold again on top of that, and then gold a third time in places where gold served no purpose whatsoever. The blitz cannon on its back rotated with a smug hydraulic purr. High in the cockpit sat WAAAGH de Rig himself, gold fangs gleaming, one arm, the one Doc Stabgit had reattached backwards after Colossa, resting on the controls at an angle that hurt to look at. 2 legs, said Grabnuts. Why's it got 2 legs? 'Cause 1 leg is a pole, said WAAAGH, and 4 legs is a squig. 2 legs is what the gods got, and what WAAAGH's got, and now what WAAAGH's rig's got. Twice the legs of a wagon with no legs at all. Do the maths. Nobody did the maths. Zogdrag climbed down the Crump Crucia's boarding chain and dropped the last 3 meters, which for an orc of his size registered locally as a small seismic event. Right, he said. Enough. The stompy ones won't come out 'cause there's nothing out here worth stompin', so we gives 'em somefin worth stompin'. He slapped the Gorkanaut's leg, and the Crump Crusher rang like a temple bell. Nothing in this galaxy can look at the Crump Crusher and not want to shoot it. It's the most shootable thing ever built. That's not a flaw, lads. That's DA feature. There was a rumble of appreciation. It was, everyone agreed, brutally cunning, possibly even cunningly brutal. Theologians would have to be consulted. Bait wants teeth, said Urgluk. The drainpipe voice made the slag gravel shiver. Me and the lads'll ride up with him, in the truck. He paused, and the pause had weight, like everything else about him. The closer they comes, the closer we is. That's the whole plan, said Fizzbang, scandalized. Walk at 'em till they shoots ya. That's not a plan, that's a cue. The plan, rumbled Urgluk, is that closer is better. The Vox grill crackled, and closest is best. Part 2. Da Pounce. The truck was called Da Second One, because the first one Urgluk had commandeered that morning had been judged too flimsy after a meganob sat in it. It rattled up the ruined roadway with 6 suits of mega armor packed in the back, like the galaxy's angriest tinned rations, and the driver, a young boy named Skid, who had volunteered before fully understanding the assignment, was having the best and possibly last day of his life. Beside and above them came the Crump Crucia. It is difficult to describe a Gorkanaut's walk to anyone who has not felt one through the soles of their boots. It does not stride so much as repeatedly demolish the concept of the ground. Zogdrag rode the pilot throne with his claw hand on the controls and his other hand hovering, not touching, just hovering, the way a weird boy hovers near a good idea. Over the big brass button he had installed himself and labeled, in proud, uneven glyphs, More. Stumpy, 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 Zogdrag crooned over the external speakers, which he'd had fitted for precisely this sort of diplomacy. Come out. Look at all this lovely Gorkanaut. It's got a claw and everything. For 11 glorious seconds, the Manufactorum district pretended to be empty. Then a wall 40 meters to the truck's right stopped being a wall. The destrier came through it shoulder first, in an avalanche of rockcrete, moving faster than anything that size had any right to move, its Gatling cannon already howling up to speed. and the world in front of Skid's windscreen turned into a horizontal blizzard of shells. DA's second one did not so much explode as get deleted. One instant, truck. Next instant, an expanding cloud of red-hot bits, a spinning wheel, and a wrecking ball describing a graceful arc into the third story of a chapel. The shells kept coming, chewing the wreck, chewing the road, chewing the smoke itself. And out of the smoke, at a walk, came the Meganobs. Urgluk led them. The custom force field was a dome of green lightning around the mob, and every shell that hit it burst into fat sparks and slid off sideways, and the field snarled and spat and held. Behind Urgluk, the lads strolled through the storm with their killsaws up, and one of them, Dregmaw, who had a reputation, was laughing so hard inside his suit that his Vox grill was just broadcasting static with teeth in it. The second destrier had come through a different wall to catch the survivors. There were not supposed to be survivors. Its cannon poured everything it had into the little green dome, and the dome walked towards it at a steady, terrible, unhurried pace. "Closer," said Urgluk, "to nobody, to everybody is better." That was when the far end of the district decided the ambush was blown, and the big ones came out. The Castellan emerged first, and every orc on the field who saw it felt his heart grow one size, because this was what they'd walked across a galaxy for. It came around the Manufactorum gable like a moving fortress, all banners and gun mouths, and beside it, low and fast and wicked, came the one the boys had already nicknamed the Jousty Git, the Lancer, shock lance crackling, shield spinning on its arm like a coin. Both of them looked at the battlefield. Both of them made the same professional assessment that gunnery officers of every species make. Both of them shot the Crump Crucia. The volcano lance hit first, and a spear of light the color of a dying sun went through the smoke, through the air, and through several of Zogdreg's favorite armor plates. The plasma came after, and the siege breakers, and the missiles, and for 4 full seconds, the Crump Crucia stood inside a fire that had its own weather. Inside the cockpit, Klaxon screamed. A grot oiler was extinguishing another grot oiler, and Zogdreg watched his gauges spin like shoot-a-drums and grinned wide enough to bite a moon. "There you are," he whispered. He pressed the button marked "More." The Crump Crucia came out of the firestorm blackened, smoking, short one shoulder plate and most of its paint, and walking. Its Deathstorm mega-shooter spun up with a rising shriek, and the sound rolled across the slag fields to where the rest of the WAAAGH was watching, and the WAAAGH answered. You could feel it arrive. That was the thing the Humies never understood, that it was a weather system. 10,000 orcs who had spent a week bored out of their skulls saw 5 stumpy ones standing in the open at last, and the ash itself seemed to go green at the edges, and the roar started at one end of the line and came back around like a wave in a bucket. "Here we go," bellowed the line. "Here we go, here we go." And everything with wheels, legs, or sufficiently motivated feet began to move. Part 3. Daw Steel and Daw Skewer. The Meganobs reached the first destrier. At the same moment, the destrier ran out of ideas. It had emptied most of a magazine into Urgluk's force field. It now tried to back away and bring its frag bombard down for a point-blank shot, and it was still turning when Urgluk's power claw closed around its ankle joint, with a sound like a fortress door slamming, and the mob hit it. 5 kill saws, all at once, biting into armor that had turned aside the weapons of 3 wars. This was the moment Urgluk had walked through the firestorm for, the lads swarming up the leg, the second destrier turning to help and finding Meganobs already between them. Both Stompy wounds his at killsaw range, and nothing in the galaxy able to take that away from him. The air behind the destriers went green, bulged, and tore. Teleporter light is not like other light. It is the color of a headache, and it arrives with a smell of burnt copper and a whoomp that orcs find festive and everyone else finds deeply upsetting. Out of the tear, stumbling, whooping, trailing sparks and one confused squig, came Fizzbang Tank Papa's Tank Bustus, 6 of them plus the boss Knob, tube launches already on shoulders, at a range where missing was a genuine achievement. "Tank Bustus!" screamed the boss Knob, in case anyone was in doubt. "Das latest as now!" The volley took both destriers side-on. Rockets went into leg joints, into carapace vents, into the first destrier's magazine, and the ambushers of the Manufactorum district, the patient hunters who had waited a week for the perfect moment, came apart in a series of blasts that lifted the Meganobs off the first one's leg and threw them across the road like yellow dice. When the smoke cleared, the 2 stompy ones were 2 burning heaps of scrap, and the Meganobs were picking themselves up, and there was nothing left to kill except some wreckage that was already dead. Dregmaw put his kill saw through a fallen Gatling cannon anyway, on principle. It didn't help. Urgluk rose from the rubble very slowly. His mega armor was scorched, his force field projector was hissing, and his silence, as he turned to look across the field at the distant gold glint of Fizzbang's position, had a quality that made nearby orcs remember urgent appointments elsewhere. The Vox crackled. "You saw dat, lads," came Fizzbang's voice, bright as a new tooth. "Plan was on da slate. Step 4, telly da bustas in when da stumpy ones is looking at Urgluk. Executed, perfect, bit early, and technically it was step 2. But that's plans for ya. Dey runs in a different order." "Dey was mine," said Urgluk. The drainpipe voice came through the Vox flat and enormous. "Bofe of 'em. Mine." "And now dey's nobody's," said Fizzbang reasonably. "Dat's teamwork." Somewhere in the ranks, an old boy explained to a young boy that this was exactly what had happened to Fizzbang on Colossa with the Grots, and that the wheel of stealin' turns for us all, and dat's proper deep, dat is. The jousty git, meanwhile, was learning about the WAAAGH artillery park. The Lancer was built to run down anything that threatened its bigger kin, and it did run low and fast along the roadway, shield flaring, lance crackling, graceful as anything the Humies had ever built. What it ran into was the collected professional opinion of every mech gun the Gutripa had brought to Armageddon. The custom megacanons spoke first. Custom megacanons are loaded, aimed and fired by grot crews, which means every shot is a democratic vote between enthusiasm and terror, and no two shots are ever the same size. The first shell whined past the lancer and vaporized a chimney. The second hit its ion shield and splashed. The third, and the grots responsible would dine out on this for the rest of their short lives, arrived like the fist of Mork himself, caught the lancer mid-stride at the hip, and opened a hole in it that daylight could walk through. The lancer staggered, kept coming. These were nobles of an old house. They did not know how to stop. "Loot-ass!" roared a voice. "Give it the full spanner." 16 def guns opened up in a single rolling brrrt that went on so long, several gunners had to be slapped to make them reload. The lancer vanished inside a hornet cloud of shells, armor plates shedding, shield generator screaming. Still up, still coming. Lance lowered now for one last glorious charge. And beside the tractor cannons, Grabnut Skyfisher stood with his fists clenched and his cracked monocle fogging with rage, watching the greatest targets of his entire career refuse to fly. "Look at it," he snarled. His crews cringed. "Look at it. 40 tons of primo target, and it's just walkin'. Tractor cannons is for pullin' things out the sky. Is it in the sky? No. Is anything in the sky? Not for a week." He took a breath that could have inflated a battle wagon tire. "Fire anyway. Scratch to gets paint. Might annoy him into jumpin'." The tractor beams lanced out and seized the charging lancer, and did what tractor beams do to something with 2 very good legs and 400 tons of conviction. They slowed it by an amount visible only to instruments, scored 3 long, ugly grooves across its heraldry, and made its pilot, presumably, mildly concerned about his paintwork. "Pathetic," whispered Grabnuts. "I killed a bell with D's." The killing blow, in the end, came from none of them. It came from Gubzap the Lucky, a Big Mek of no previous fame whatsoever, who commanded the second Luta mob and carried on his back a shock attack gun of his own manufacture, a weapon whose targeting philosophy could best be described as somewhere. Gubzap had been firing it all battle. He had so far hit a wall, a different wall, a cloud of smoke, one of Fizzbang's rockets in mid-flight. Both parties agreed never to speak of it. And very briefly, the warp itself. Now he braced, squinted through the Git-Finder goggles he'd won at cards, and fired at the lancer. The gun screamed, reality hiccuped, and a snotling, one single snotling, plucked from the ammo cage, dragged screaming through the raw madness between worlds, materialized directly inside the Lancer's reactor housing, along with everything the warp had decided to attach to him on the way through. The explosion was the color of nothing sensible. The Lancer's charge ended 11 meters short of the gun line, in a kneeling ruin of slag and lance, and the shield on its arm spun once, twice, and rang down flat on the roadway like a dropped coin. There was a moment of silence. "Dat," bellowed Gubzap to the entire war, "is why dey calls me da Lucky." "Nobody calls you dat," shouted his spanner boy. "You calls yourself dat." "My cannons opened him up," howled a grot from the mega cannon pits. My lads emptied 16 drums into... I scratched him first, roared Grabnuts with dignity. The dispute was resolved in the traditional manner, escalating from insult through headbutt to friendship in under a minute, and history would record, because Gubzap got to the story first and told it loudest, that the jousty git was slain by the lucky one's magic snotling, with some help. Part 4. Closest is best. 2 stumpy ones remained, the pair of big ones, the Fortress Knights, striding out from the manufactorum together with every gun they owned, coming to life at once, and Zogdrag Clawfist, blackened and buttonless no longer, looked around the battlefield from the Crump Crusher's throne, and made an unwelcome discovery. Every armored target within reach was already dead, dying, or being argued over. "Typical," he muttered. "Bring da best claw on Armageddon, and da gits go and die before I gets dare." Then his goggles swept the roadway junction, and found the Humy infantry. They had held their ground through all of it. 2 shield walls of black-armored Humies, the kind with the riot shields and the shock mauls, the ones the boys called Da Wall Humies. They stood in perfect ranks in the ash, shields locked, holding a junction that no longer mattered in a battle they could no longer influence, because their duty said hold, and so they held. It was, in its way, magnificent. The Crumpcrusha turned. The Death Storm Megashooter spun up. Zogdrag, who had a claw named after violence, and a heart, somewhere, capable of a rough kind of respect, gave them the honor he'd give any proper enemy. He gave them everything. The Death Storm fired for 6 seconds. When it stopped, there was no shield wall, no junction, and no meaningful distinction between the two. The ash smoked. The Crump Crusher's barrels glowed cherry red and ticked as they cooled. "Proper ard dem wall Humies," said Zogdrag with genuine approval, into the silence. "Didn't run or nuffin'." Then both Castellans shot him at once. There was no weathering it this time, no button worth pressing, no more left in the machine's great iron heart. 2 volcano lances crossed inside the Crumpcrusha's chest, and plasma followed them in, and the Gorkanaut that had been bait, spearhead, and idol of Gork to the boys of the Gutripa took one more full step, because it was a Gorkanaut, and it would finish its stride if it killed it, and came apart at the seams in a rolling sunrise of detonating ammunition. Down the line, the fire swept on. Boys went down in dozens as siegebreaker shells walked through the mobs. A war truck cartwheeled, burning. The advance did not stop. The advance did not even consider stopping. But for a moment, the whole war could feel it in the field, in the green. Something big had gone out. Out of the burning wreck of the Crumpcrusha, coughing, one boot missing, crawled Zogdrag Clawfist. In his fist was the brass button, trailing its wires. He stood, swaying, in the middle of a battlefield, determined to kill him, and looked at his life's work burning, and the boys nearby went quiet, because everyone knew Daw's saying, "Da fight ain't over, till Da Crumpcrusha arrives." And Da Crumpcrusha had arrived, and now it never would again. Zogdrag turned to face the Castellans. He held up the button so they could see it. "Oi!" he roared, with the lungs of an orc who no longer had speakers to do it for him. "Dat was me favorite. Kill 'em, lads, kill 'em with every fin." And every fin is a lot when the Gutripa's Meks bring their whole yard to a war. The Lutas fired, both mobs, 30-odd def guns in one continuous avalanche of shells. The mega cannons fired, enthusiasm winning the vote in every pit. Gubzap fired, and the warp took another snotling on the world's worst journey. Fizzbang's Tankbustus fired the last of their rockets, arguing about which step this was. Grabnuts, swearing an oath about the sky that no one dared interrupt, fired. And through it all came the golden two-legged dakka at a piston-pumping sprint, Blitzkannon rotating, WAAAGH da rig narrating at full volume. And den, lads, de great WAAAGH and his golden strider did smite de big one with de fury of Gork, probably Mork as well, bofa of 'em. The first Castellan's ion shield stopped 100 hits, 101. Somewhere past counting, in the middle of that iron monsoon, it stopped stopping. The Blitzkannon shells, and the def gun shells, and one profoundly unlucky snotling, all arrived together, and the Fortress Knight went the way of its house's honor, all at once, standing up, in a fireball visible from Hive Vulcanus's western wall. The last Stompy one stood alone in the ruins of the ambush it had planned, burning in 4 places, one arm dead at its side, shield failing, and it planted its feet in the ash and kept firing, because these were nobles of an old house, and they did not know how to stop. It never saw the mega knobs until they were inside its shadow. They had been walking the whole time, through the wreck field, through the shellfire, through the burning district, 5 suits of scorched yellow plate, and 1 Big Mek with a snarling force field, at the same steady, terrible, unhurried pace as always, while the war screamed past overhead. Now, Urgluk Ironclad stood at the Castellan's foot and looked up at 18 meters of dying fortress, and the drainpipe voice, for once, sounded almost warm. "There y'are," he said. "Told ya, closer is better." The killsaws bit, the claw closed, and the meganobs went up the last stumpy one, like the tide goes up a rock, joyfully, thoroughly, taking it apart plate by plate and cable by cable, while it thrashed and burned, until something deep inside it gave a long shuddering groan, and the whole proud tonnage of it came down at last, down into the ash of Armageddon, with 6 orcs riding it all the way to the ground, and cheering. The echo took a long time to finish. Night came down on the Manufactorum district, the way night comes down on Armageddon. Brown, then black, lit at the edges by fires nobody intended to put out. The boys sang around the wrecks. Somewhere, Gubzap was telling the snotling story for the 10th time, louder each round. Somewhere Fizzbang was drawing tomorrow's slate. Somewhere Urgluk sat on a fallen Fortress Knight's shield, saying nothing, entirely content. Zogdreg Clawfist sat apart on the cooling foot of the Krumpkrusha, turning the brass button over in his fingers. Above him, ash sifted slowly out of the dark. In the ash, invisible, uncountable, drifted the spores, settling into the wrecks of the great machines, into the seams of ancient armor, into ground that 5 noble pilots had died, believing they could keep. Some of the Humies' fortresses had stood for 1,000 years. Give it a season, and there would be orcs growing in them. Zogdreg pocketed the button and grinned at the dark, and began to plan a bigger one. The End.